and welcome to Salmon, Showing Us the Way Home, presented by UCUT and in partnership with Cascade Fisheries and the Wenatchee River Institute. So our mission at NCW Libraries is to connect people to vital resources and opportunities that foster individual growth and strengthen communities. And I'm honored to host this opportunity to learn about the salmon recovery work that's being done on the Upper Columbia River. Wenatchee River Institute is a nonprofit organization located in Leavenworth with a mission to connect people, communities, and the natural world through transformative environmental education for all ages. Cascade Fisheries is a nonprofit that is part of 14 regional fisheries enhancement groups in Washington State, and whose mission is to restore native fish habitat through enhancement, education, and community engagement. The Upper Columbia United Tribes, or UCUT, takes a proactive and collaborative and science-based approach to promoting fish, water, wildlife, diverse habitat, and Indian culture in the Northwest. Their mission is to unite Upper Columbia River tribes for the protection, preservation, and enhancement of treaty and executive order rights, sovereignty, culture, fish, water, wildlife, habitat, and other interests and issues of common concern in their respective territories through a structured process of cooperation and coordination for the benefit of all people. Now it is my pleasure to introduce DR Michel, the Executive Director of UCUT. DR is a member of the Confederated Tribes of the Colville Reservation and has over 36 years of experience in forestry and natural resource management, as well as the technical and policy aspects of working for the tribes. He served 8 years on the Colville Business Council as both the vice chair and the chair of the Natural Resource Committees. And in his free time, he likes camping on the Columbia River. So welcome, DR.
Thank you. Honored to be here with you tonight. Appreciate the opportunity to share some of the work UCUT's doing in the upper end of the river to bring the salmon home. Again, my name's DR Michel. I'm a citizen of the Colville tribe, Lakes and Colville bands of the Confederated Tribes of the Colville Reservation. I've been the executive director of UCUT now for 14 years. Together we manage and influence nearly 2 million acres of reservation land and influence at least 14 million acres of Aboriginal territories, 500 miles of waterways, 40 interior lakes, and 30 dams and reservoirs. We were formed in 1982. We come together to ensure a healthy future for the traditional territorial lands of our ancestors. As sovereign nations, we are charged with the protection and enhancement of our natural resources. And an important part of what we do, and I think our mission statement lays that out very well, in that what we're doing in the Upper Columbia just doesn't benefit the tribes or tribal people. As you hear in our mission statement, it's the cooperation and coordination for the benefit of all people. So what we do, again, don't just benefit the tribes, it'll benefit everybody who lives along the river, who comes to recreate, who comes to spend time, will enjoy those benefits of the salmon in the Upper Columbia. It's been 5 generations. My grandparents were the last ones to see salmon at Kettle Falls. My grandfather actually did some work and work on the dam and in some of those other areas. I've been blessed with a little great granddaughter. So that's part of that responsibility. And again, we take that very serious, as in, and it's been our responsibility for generations. Salmon was one of the first beings to offer itself up to us as humans to survive, and it was the salmon provided for us if we took care of it, and we take that very serious. And again, looking at these opportunities that the Columbia River Treaty and some of the other things that are going on in the Upper Columbia allow us to do. Economics, and I think this is an important part of how we need to change how we look at the river and how we operate it. For years now, developing the river, irrigation, navigation, the power generation, flood control, all of those things are looked at as benefits. But when we start talking about enhancing our natural resources, bringing the salmon home, taking care of that wildlife that for thousands of years have also used that river. Those become costs. And it's important that we change the way we look at that, a paradigm shift in that those are all benefits. There's a lot of economics around ecosystem, around fish passage. And we did a study that talked about that. And a couple of points out of that study I'd like to share with you tonight is the Columbia River Basin holds immense natural capital value. Ecosystem services are estimated to provide a value of $190 billion annually. This value far exceeds, dwarfs all other economic values. For comparison, hydropower provides a value of $3.3 billion per year. Modernizing how we look at the river in that sense, there's a lot of economic opportunities and fishing opportunities, recreational, and just that again, overall health of the river. If your national capital starts to decline, your built capital will also start to see losses. And I think we've seen some of that in the past years with operations and you know, we hear a lot, well, there's a lot of salmon, or the salmon are in decline. In 2016, we lost over 250,000 sockeye died in the river trying to get up through the system. So again, while certain times of the year or certain years, those runs will be better than other years, but that's heavily dependent on operations and weather and runoff and all of those things that happens, you know, in between that has a huge impact on our ability to realize those economic benefits. It doesn't, as we go forward, again, we need to take a look at that in that sense that it doesn't have to be either or. You know, we can have hydropower, we can have flood risk, all of those other things that happen in the river, and we can also have our salmon back. We can also manage those natural resources. Again, it doesn't have to be either or. We have a video I'd like to share with you today that talks about that in the sense that we have a couple of our technical folks, and again, just some overall comments from some of our tribal leaders about the importance of this. And it gets a little bit deeper into some of the technology and some of the projected numbers that we're talking about in return those salmon. There's a couple of stories in there. Just the resiliency of these fish is amazing. We've actually had some cultural and educational releases here in the last few years, and those releases have been very good in the sense that the salmon have showed us the way. They're providing us with the information we need to help make those changes in the system to bring them home. We've got spreads, we've got spawning activity in the Samquel, we've got spawning activity in some of the other tributaries. In just that short amount of time, the fish, the salmon have again adapted, and the resiliency of them is just amazing. That provide them an opportunity, and they will take advantage of it. And again, you get a chance, go out and just check it out. It's amazing to see the fish swimming in the river again, to be able to have that feeling, to know that they're there. They've made it up into Canada. They've caught them, and they've seen them at the basic Killingside Dam, the first dam on the main stem. So the salmon are just looking for this opportunity, and it's our responsibility as tribal folks, and just as people who live and come to the river also. So we'll go ahead and roll this video. It lasts about 15 minutes, and then we'll afterwards we'll open it up for some questions and some conversations with you guys. Again, real honored to be here with you tonight, and appreciate the opportunity. So before construction of the dams on the river, it was It was home for us for thousands of years. We lived on the river, we fished at Kettle Falls, and it was a very important spiritual and cultural part of our life, our way of life. And with the construction of those dams, that was taken away from us for over 80 years now. And the importance of bringing that back, not only again for the tribes, but for everybody, is that connection.
My ancestors' relationship with salmon is since time immemorial. We have known the salmon since the beginning. It's in our creation stories, it's in our oral stories, and that beautiful fish sustained my ancestors, and until we had the salmon no more.
You know, we've lived off this land for millennia, for thousands of years, and developed a relationship and a way of life and understanding and identity that's based on our relationship with the animals and stuff that are occurring. One of those major pieces for the Coeur d'Alene tribe are salmon.
I don't think the tribe's ever surrendered to the loss of those salmon. I think it's always been in the back of our minds that one day we would bring them home. And UCUT is a centralized organization that works for those 5 tribes, that bring them together on those common issues.
Hundreds of thousands of salmon used to return to the Spokane River. The tribe used to harvest historically tens of thousands of fish, ranging from all the way to Little Falls all the way to Spokane Falls, at different fishing locations along the way, and from the Spokane's tributaries.
Seeing the salmon across the whole river, so plentiful, so large that you could just walk across the river on their backs.
Certainly the dominant runs of salmon within the Hangman Creek watershed were Chinook and steelhead, and we still see remnant steelhead populations in the former resident red-band trout in the headwaters of Hangman Creek. When it comes to Chinook, it was likely spring Chinook were moving into the upper watershed, and some summer Chinook were spawning in the lower part of the watershed. And as far as numbers of those fish, I would just say that historical accounts, you know, estimate that upwards of 1,000 fish were sometime harvested within a day in lower Hangman Creek.
When we look at salmon decline within the Columbia River Basin, often the 4 H's come up: harvest, hatcheries, habitat, and hydrodevelopment. And the Upper Columbia and Spokane rivers were really impacted originally by harvest from lower river commercial fisheries and the cannery operations that targeted the June hogs, the large Chinook salmon that came up to the Spokane River. And then, of course, hydrodevelopment. First with the construction of Little Falls Dam, which originally had fish passage. However, when the subsequent dams on the Spokane River were constructed, they started to block fish passage to those really productive habitats. The main stem river downstream of the city of Spokane, Hangman Creek, and the Little Spokane River. And this was all between the 1910s and the 1930s. When Grand Coulee was constructed, completed in 1941, that was really kind of the final nail in the coffin for salmon in our region.
And then Little Falls Dam is built and blocks the salmon. Then Grand Coulee is built and totally blocks the salmon, cuts off the salmon from our tribal people.
The vision's always been there. The Coeur d'Alene tribe has never forgot salmon. You know, it was always a part of their culture, and it always will be. And although it wasn't until the last 15 years or so that started to gain momentum regionally, really started to put the pedal down and start to get some momentum on salmon recovery back in about 2010, 2012, when the tribes in the Columbia River Basin all got together and figured that this should be a major policy change and a major goal within the basin, is to recover salmon above Chief Joseph and Grand Coulee dams.
We understand the reality of all situations since previous centuries, that our neighbors were here and we have always welcomed them with open arms. We realize that a century's worth of damage done to our waterways and our fish, we alone cannot rectify the situation. We understand that there are lots of parties involved with different interests, And we understand that we cannot get to our ultimate goals. We cannot accomplish that without our neighbors, without our friends, without our adversaries. And it's going to take a large group of people, a large number of parties to fix a century's worth of damage. We still envision a day where there are sea-run fish in the stream behind me. That is the ultimate goal, and we will not waver on that goal.
When it comes to restoration, we try to take that holistic approach and look at how all those different ecosystems tie into one another, how they support one another, and then what actions can we take to improve conditions so we can have a home for salmon when they do finally return to Hangman Creek.
Upper Columbia tribes, including the Spokane tribe, are pursuing a phased approach to reintroduction. It's described within the Northwest Power and Conservation Council's 2014 Columbia River Basin Fish and Wildlife Program. Phase 1 involved a lot of tabletop exercises, looking at existing data for habitat availability, suitability, as well as fish passage technologies that are available that might be applied to Spokane River and Columbia main stem dams. Phase 2 is real research studies that evaluate salmon survival as they migrate out of the Spokane River and down the Columbia, and as adults coming back, where we put acoustic tags, radio tags, and pit tags in fish and monitor their behavior, survival, sources of mortality, to determine where we can make improvements and bring these salmon back. And phase 3 is permanent reintroduction. Depending on the results from phase 2, we'll look at the feasibility, what improvements, what sort of infrastructure might be required to have permanent reintroduction and reestablish populations within the Spokane River and Upper Columbia River watersheds. When we look at Spokane River dams and the outmigration timing of salmon and steelhead, those fish are out migrating during peak flows when the river is going over the spillways and not necessarily the turbines. So survival may be high enough to support a population where we may not even need fish passage at specific projects.
When we talk about creating water quality that can support salmon, we need to get at those root causes, like nutrient input, like high levels of erosion, solar radiation within the stream. We need to start addressing those issues so we can get a handle on providing cold water and dissolved oxygen for salmon when they return to the basin.
The Spokane River provides a really unique opportunity for salmon and steelhead, especially as we face climate change. In-stream flows are fed by the Spokane Valley Raft and Prairie Aquifer. That groundwater is consistently cool and provides consistent flow to the river. So these fish have cold, clean water available to them year-round, particularly in the summer when we see temperatures escalate, for instance in this year, into the triple digits for an extended period of time.
The Spokane River is water. It is sacred. Our people since time immemorial knew that the Creator provided this environment for us, and it wasn't provided to us so that we owned it or that we were to take it and do whatever we want with it, but the Creator gave it to us to take care of it.
During these cultural and ceremonial and educational releases, I was involved in some of them here, year and a half, 2 years ago, and to see the salmon swimming in those waters at Kettle Falls is very hard to describe the emotions and the feelings to see the ripples of those salmon swimming away from us as we released them. It's been 80 years since they've been in those waters, and we turned them loose and it was like they was never gone.
That relationship is something that is still there. That relationship stands there waiting for us to bring it back.
So as we look at being able to increase and return the health of our people, one of the key puzzles to that are the elements of the natural world around us, and that includes salmon, that includes the red band that are all throughout Hangman, and our ability to be able to make sure that we restore those and get those healthy and functioning, from our perspective, is a part of our wholesome health for the tribe as a whole. And as we've mentioned, important not just for the tribe, but for the entire region.
Spokane isn't aware or doesn't recognize the value that salmon can provide to the community, to the ecosystem, being a subsidy of marine-derived nutrients to aquatic, riparian, and upland habitats.
When you look at economically what good healthy salmon run would entail and what it would incur, you're talking about providing benefits that are just beyond, the Coeur d'Alene tribe as well.
The economy that can be supported by recreation, tourism, fishing, restoration industry, and the restoration of identity, not just for the Spokane tribe, but for the city.
From our perspective, it's not about just doing what's right for our own people. It's about doing what's right for everybody around us and making sure we're finding ways to celebrate life together. And so from our perspective, as we go about and do all this work, even though sometimes it can be super challenging, we look at it as being beneficial to the entire region, not just the Coeur d'Alene tribe.
I'm extremely optimistic the salmon reintroduction can work in the Spokane and the Upper Columbia rivers. Not because I'm an idealist and want to wish good things upon the world, but because we've seen it work. Over the past several years, the tribe has performed small-scale cultural and educational releases, where pit tag juveniles have been released to the Spokane River and its tributaries, and we've monitored those fish as they outmigrate down the Columbia River. We've seen unexpectedly high survival as those fish encounter Columbia River dams below Chief Joe. And we've had 4 adults out of 750 juveniles return back to the Columbia Basin, one of which made it as far as the Chief Joseph Hatchery ladder. As far as that fish could possibly have swam, it did to reach its home waters.
To think that salmon can persist even in the conditions of the Columbia River like they are now, with so much hydro development, so much fishing pressure, and everything fighting against those salmon, and for their ability to still hold on and in some cases support natural production that can sustain a small population, gives me hope. It gives me hope that even the conditions that you see in parts of Hangman Creek, that salmon could overcome.
We have to do our part. Our ancestors did their part. Now we need to do our part, and our part is respecting the environment, keeping it clean, honoring it, and not taking advantage of it. That's important. Otherwise, it's not going to be here for our future generations.
That feeling to see him at Kettle Falls was amazing, and it's something as a tribal citizen I'll never forget. So, technically the salmon are home, and we have to continue to provide them those opportunities to continue to do what they've done for thousands of years, and that's provide us with substances, with nourishment, with those cultural ties to the fish. It's just something that we're, as tribal citizens, we'll never give up on. We'll never quit trying to bring them home.
So one of the questions that I had from watching some of this is is there anything that we as community members can do to contribute to a lot of these recovery efforts?
Yeah, I think it's important. as you heard, we've gained some momentum, but I think it's important that we continue to tell that story and to talk about this in the sense that we need to talk to our local politicians and leaders and the importance, and again our ability to do this, the opportunity with where we're at with the Columbia River Treaty and some of the other things happening on the river provides us this opportunity to look at those operations and how we can do this again to benefit everybody and not to take away from anyone. That all of the things that are happening on the river are important, and we've designed our phase 2 approach around not impacting current operations or changing any of that. We're trying to make we're working to make sure that the salmon fit within current operations and provide benefits, not costs. And again, I think that's the important part of it. Those are benefits. There are a lot of economic opportunities that we're not taking advantage of. So talk to your local politicians and your friends and family, and just tell them how important this is for our future generations, the little great grandkids, 7 generations.
We had a question, it might be like a really good fundamental one to address, is like, what are the reasons that fish ladders aren't in place at these dams?
Again, I think there was a lot of circumstances around again, technology was part of it. And then again, the economics at the time, that they didn't necessarily, and wasn't looking at those opportunities as economic back then either. They were looked at as not important. When Cooley Dam was built, the U.S. sent a letter to Canada asking them if they had any issues with salmon being blocked at Kettle Falls with Grand Coulee, and Canada basically replied with no. There's no commercial fishery at Kettle Falls. We're not worried about it. Not understanding again the impacts. If you don't have passage at Chief Joe, you don't have a commercial fishery, or excuse me, at Grand Coulee at the time, you don't have a commercial fishery in the lower river because those fish have nowhere to spawn. And for the tribal folks, they were never notified that this was going on. Some of the tribal members at the time had thought they'd done something wrong when the salmon didn't return. The government didn't inform or didn't let us. We wasn't part of the process. We didn't even know at the time what was going on or why they were doing it. And again, so a lot of the tribal members thought that they had done something wrong because the fish were coming home.
Can you talk a little bit more about the specifics of how salmon are being put above the dams and then coming back downstream?
So currently they're being just kind of dependent on the study or the circumstances. The salmon are being turned loose in those areas. We're trucking, hauling them in. We're transplanting them up into the tributaries, Shimmikin Creek, Hayman Creek, Sampuel. So we're planting them in those areas. We're trucking them into those areas. But as you'd heard Connor talking about, some of those fish were turned loose above Grand Coulee and Chief Joe. So they're either going through the spillway or through the turbines, and they're able to survive. And same with Chief Joe. They either go over the spillway or through the turbines. So providing with, and we're not really sure even yet if it's ladders. There's the new whoosh technology, the salmon can, and there's a lot of new technologies out there again that provide us a different opportunity to make those things happen. So it doesn't necessarily have to be ladders. There's a lot of things that we're currently looking at.
Can you expand a little bit on what that whoosh technology is, what that entails?
So that's the salmon cannon. You put them in the tube, and basically it's negative air pressure, and it sucks the fish up through the tube and into the whatever you're trying to go over. They're using them in Cle Elum and a couple other areas very, very successfully, and returning adults. The juveniles are a different story. We'll have to work on. We're looking at different ways to again, it'd be some sort of a trap, and haul with the juveniles, or again, a little early on in the testing and in our phase 2 to actually nail down some of these technologies. So we're looking at a 20-year plan to as it relates to phase 2.
Okay. With some of the geographic specifics, where is Hangman's Creek and the drainage area, and how long is that they talked about in the video?
That's a tributary into the Spokane River at a Coeur d'Alene.
Okay.
And I'm not exactly sure the length or anything, but it has those impacts on the main stem of Spokane. Jimmickin's a tributary off the Spokane Res into the Spokane River. So when they turn those fish loose in those areas, they go down through the Vista dams on the Spokane River, out to the main stem, down through Grand Coulee, down through Chief Joe, and then the lower river dams all have passage. And then they so that's kind of where we're at currently in phase 2, looking at those options or opportunities on how to do it.
I had a question from someone who's actually in Portland, and they're asking, is there any talk between Washington and Oregon and the politicians there that we should be paying attention to?
Wow, that's a pretty open-ended question. I mean, unfortunately, there's, in that circumstance, there's a lot of politics around, and I guess basically fear of what this may do, or how it might impact some of those current operations and issues again. And as I said earlier, we're working to have to have no impacts on those current operations. We understand all of the important aspects of that. So just again, that communication, that support, telling them of these opportunities, talking to them about it. We've gained a lot of support over the last few years with the local politicians, county commissioners, mayors, and city councils, and we're willing to go out and talk to anybody who wants to listen to us about, again, those opportunities and the importance, not just to the tribes, but to all of us and those future generations.
How does this reintroduction effort influence the renegotiation of the Columbia River Treaty between the US and Canada?
It's a very important part of those negotiations, and again, we're talking with the US government and the Canadian government about that. And unfortunately, I think through these processes, they're being looked at a little bit differently on both sides of the border. They're still working through those issues. But on the US side, they're looking at fish passage as a domestic issue. So it's not necessarily part of the negotiations of the Columbia River Treaty and those operations. But what we're saying is those operations cannot preclude fish passage. If it's a domestic issue, we've got to be able to run through phase 2 and show how it can work. And then those solutions need to be able to be implemented into the treaty. So it's not necessarily part of those negotiations, but they can't preclude fish passage as part of that going forward.
So who is supporting a lot of the work that you're doing in this effort? Like, who are your big partners at UCUT that you're working with? Fish and Wildlife Service, those entities. We've got a lot of support from the federal politicians in the area. We've been out talking to county commissioners and all of those folks. Generally have a lot of concerns, but after talking and seeing where we're at and getting a better picture, they've been supportive. So we've been getting funds. We've got funds from Washington now. We're getting some federal funds. We're talking to counties again, and it doesn't. It's not all cash or money needs. It's there's that support. There's that talk of we're all going to have to give a little, in the sense that there will be some change. You hear some folks talk about the salmon are in decline. Those numbers are good, but you look at all of those species who are in decline, or who are on the endangered list, and who are all of those issues are real, and
again, I just can't emphasize enough the opportunity we have to correct some of that with an approach to looking at all of it. Again, we can't continue to operate the system in these lakes and reservoirs. We need to, as best we can, look at the river again as a whole, from the headwaters to the estuary, and there's a lot of things happen between those 2 points. So it's going to take, again, all of us to make this happen.
I understand that due to pollution from mining and smelting, the number of fish people should eat from the river is limited. What are UCUT efforts to address that pollution issue in conjunction with the salmon recovery?
A lot of that for 100 years has come as came out of Canada, different operations in the U.S. So there is a lot of legacy pollution issues. We're dealing with them best we can, but return the salmon to the Upper Columbia would provide all of us with some of the cleanest calories we could have, in the sense of those fish. Those resident fish are unfortunately seeing most of the impacts from those legacy pollution issues. They're in those waters all the time. They're eating all of the other food and the sediments that are impacted by that pollution. They're in that all the time. So the salmon coming up the river, it's a journey for them up the river, but they're not necessarily in those polluted waters for that long period of time. So those salmon would provide us with cleaner, and again, our ability to utilize to eat the fish out of the river. So there's a couple of things there in that sense, and the tribes are taking the lead in working to clean up and to correct some of those legacy issues. The tribes filed suit against Tecominco for dumping their slag directly into the river for over 100 years, and the impacts that's had on not just the ecosystem or the salmon or the fish in the river, but to the wildlife and to humans, to us inhaling all of the dust and all of those other issues. They have a 40-50 foot drawdown on Lake Roosevelt in the spring for runoff, and that opens up miles and miles of beach, and we get those spring windstorms, and there's big dust clouds that those sediments are airborne, and we as humans are also being impacted by those. We have a very high rate of really just ugly cancers and stomach issues and things that are and it's tied directly back to those sediments and to those things that we've been inhaling and being impacted for years too. So
what are some of the benefits that you've seen during this recovery and reintroduction to the younger tribal nation members?
That reconnection, those stories being told again to those younger generations, the importance on educating them. So we're not going to be here forever. We'll go to the Creator, and those younger generations will step in behind us and need to pick this up. So that education, the importance, and bringing them along as those future leaders to continue this process and to provide those opportunities for the next generation. We're always trying to look 7 generations out too. So just again, education is important, and telling those stories, those creation stories about who we are as tribal people and how important that is.
Thank you for telling us this story about the fight to bring the salmon back to their historic habitat. They think that your work is generational and that we need more citizens to advocate for the political and public support of this kind of passage and work.
Once you tell that story, people understand.
I think you touched on this a little bit, but what are the permanent initiatives that are being considered to get the salmon, across the Chief Joe and Grand Coulee dams?
Yeah, no, so again, that's part of our phase 2. We'll continue to do those studies. We have a phase 3, which is actual implementation of some of those technologies we come up with. But that's what we'll be working on over the next, 10, 15, 20 years, is to see what's the most cost beneficial, effective way of moving the salmon around those adults and juveniles. And again, those technologies are out there, and we're just kind of in the process of testing those and running those studies to see which combination it will be. So in the meantime, trap and haul, and who in some instances that might be the answer for a while, is trap and haul. But there's a lot of new technologies being developed as we speak. So that's part of what phase 2 will allow us to do, is to come up with those permanent passage facilities.
Okay. It's a long-term study and project.
Yes.
Yeah. Someone asked, could you repeat or discuss a little bit further the financial comparison of salmon restoration versus the current situation?
So again, through these processes, when we were talking to folks, when we were talking to folks, and even within the federal entities, BPA, and some of those folks who are responsible for the mitigation of the impacts of the Columbia River hydro system, that's how they operate, and how they look at natural resource or fish passage or anything to do with the natural resources is basically a cost. And those, so they can spend 30, 40, 50 million dollars rebuilding a turbine or whatever those instances or cases might be, and that's looked at as a benefit or an operational cost, and those are easy to justify. But when you start talking about improving the ecosystem, salmon passages and other things, those are looked at as costs. And until we start to look at the system more as a whole, that everything about the river is a benefit, and start to operate and look at it in that sense, we're going to continue to struggle with those. And those dams are nearing or are at the some of them have been on the river for 50, 60, 70, 80 years, and they're getting to a point where they're going to need some work. So again, those are things that we can't really answer right now, but are part of those studies going forward. And again, the importance of being able to look at those opportunities with support from those people who are responsible.
Yeah.
Doesn't have to be, and I can't emphasize that enough. It doesn't have to be either or. We can have hydro, we can have flood risk management, we can have irrigation, recreation's part of that too. And we can have our ecosystem. We need our ecosystem to make the rest of that work. We did a study with Earth Economics. It's the natural capital of the Columbia River hydro system, and that's available on our website. I've seen somebody asking about that, and our website is just ucut.org, www.ucut.org, and it's got phase 1 on it, and it has phase 2 on it, and it talks about some of the things we've done in the past. And again, that economic study kind of lays out the things that we've been talking about, those economic benefits with good functioning ecosystems, and how important that is to have that, to continue to have the built capital, and the difference between natural capital and built capital, and there's a lot of, it's kind of hard to explain, but that publication is available on our website.
I'm going to combine two of the questions here. So it's kind of like, what are the other efforts that are happening within our region to return salmon to rivers in general? And then what are the other key agencies that are needed to join in this effort?
And again, I guess in our area, I'm not real specific on what's happening in other parts of the the river, but just in general, folks are looking at wherever salmon were historically on trying to get them back there. So I would say, you know, it's state, region, kind of depending on where you're at in those circumstances. I think it's happening across the country, specifically, you know, more importantly in Washington and in Idaho, Oregon, Montana, with you know, the Northwest Power Planning Council and those processes. I think we have some issues with that process, again, in the sense that their main charge is producing power and protecting us from floods, and we need to add that third leg of the stool, ecosystem function, ecosystem services, as part of those operations. And until we do, you know, we're going to continue to struggle with where we're at and what's going on.
Yeah.
Hydro, flood, ecosystem. We need that third leg of the process, and that ties back to the Columbia River Treaty and our ability to look at those operations, both sides of the border, as we move forward.
This is also, I'm going to combine two questions. What are the salmon species that you're working with? And then where do the adult species that are being put above the dams come from?
Currently, we're looking at sockeye and summer Chinook, and we're looking at the sockeye just up the river, the Okanagan sockeye and Chinook, and we're getting them from the lower hatcheries, Icicle and the lower hatcheries surplus, and we're taking those surplus fish and using them as part of that study. So currently we're not interested or don't want the stigma that goes along with putting listed fish above Chief Joe and Grand Coulee. So we're only looking at those species that are not listed or don't carry that you know, potential stigma of a listed species. So that's currently what we're working with going forward.
And could you please explain more about the concept that you mentioned of following salmon home that is being used in the research phase of the reintroduction?
So that's just the sense, again, that you know, those salmon haven't been in those waters for above Coulee in the main stem for 80 years. They haven't been up the Spokane River now for over 100 to 120 years. So there's been a lot of studies done on the salmon in those streams and what potentials are there, and you know, a lot of money spent looking at that and studies done. And it's like, if you do a study and you say the salmon should be spawning, you know, here and over here, and, you know, and in these different areas, and you put some fish loose in there and they don't spawn in those areas, they go somewhere else. They kind of look at those studies as failures when we should be turning the salmon loose in those areas and letting them show us. We've learned a lot on how potentially they and where they gather and how they circle at Grand Coulee and what side of the dam to put things on. Same with Chief Joe. Those salmon circle it at Chief Joe and have shown us where they and peel off and spawn in the Okanagan. So that's kind of what we mean. We're turning the salmon loose and we're following them. They're showing us the way home. We've turned them loose in the Samquel River. That's on the Cobble Res, and they've spawned. We just went up here at the end of August and seen a bunch of reds, and last year they spawned and we caught some in a screw trap down there at the mouth of Samquel, and some of those fish actually went down through the Samquel and down and made it through Coulee again. So those are being tagged, and we're monitoring and following them, and they're showing us the way home. They're giving us those clues on what we need to do to make it happen. Again, we turned them loose at Kettle Falls. A lot of people said those fish would just turn and go back downriver because they haven't been there for so long. But we're getting reports of them being in Canada. So you know, that's what I talked about earlier, is the resiliency of those fish. Those salmon is amazing. Couple weeks in the waters and they're looking for them. That salmon that Connor talked about went down through those 3 Avista dams on the Spokane River, over Grand Coulee, Chief Joe, down through that gauntlet of dams in the lower end, commercial fisheries, Zone 6 fishery out into the ocean, turned around and come back up and had to go through all of those things, same things, and swam as far as it could, made it to the Chief Joe hatchery, and it hadn't done anything like that in over 100 years. So
That's amazing.
we just need to provide them that opportunity. And that's why when I talk about it, I'll get this smile on my face, and because it's just amazing that after everything we've done to them, they're still trying to live up to that obligation that was there in our creation stories. And we've had a rough go here as tribal citizens and people here the last 100 years without that. And we see the opportunity, and I said earlier, we're not going anywhere. This is home, and it's our responsibility, and it's time we picked that up and we lived up to that.
There's like 3 more questions. One of them is there any talk of removing any of the dams?
No, not on our end. I mean, again, we're understanding the importance of kind of where we're at with the development of the system, and understand everything that goes along with that. And we think with current technologies and some of the things that are available, that we can do this without dam removal.
Okay. Yeah, and then I think the other one here is UCUT considering any kind of litigation with the Bureau of Reclamation?
Those are all policy decisions that haven't been looked at, but
Okay.
but are available. And again, we're not interested in spending years in litigation fighting over this. We're interested in working through our phase 2 plan that tells us how to do this economically, beneficially to everybody who lives along the Columbia River and comes to visit.
Are there specific groups or policymakers who are creating headwinds for this effort?
Again, just a lot of the local, the county commissioners and some of the local politicians have gotten on board, and we've gained a lot of support in that sense. So again, the importance and again, why we're out talking to folks about our plans and the importance of this is those opportunities. So
Yeah.
we just need to continue to share that information, share the opportunities and those successes.
And I guess my final question is, how are ways that we can stay up to date on what UCUT is doing or the efforts, and then how do we stay involved with this?
So we post some stuff to Facebook. A lot of this information is available on our website. Local, we generally try with COVID. Before COVID, we were advertising those, and we were letting folks know about those cultural and educational releases. Again, just that education and showing folks the possibilities has really garnered a lot of support, and letting folks understand and know that, again, we're trying to do this within current operations with as little impact as we can to those operations and benefits, and make that part of it.
I would just really like to thank you so much for being here and sharing the work that you all are doing with us.
Appreciate the opportunity, and any questions, comments, concerns, you've got our website. Stop by, visit, give us a call.
I want to thank everyone for being here tonight with us. Yes, check out UCUT's website, and then you can also check out NCW Library's website for any other upcoming events. And hopefully we'll be able to, in the future, continue to host the updates on what's going on with this project.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. Have a great night.